Fellow Zimbabweans, I come to you at a time when our nation and the rest of the world are facing a deep crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the world has lost 2.54 million people to the pandemic, and with 114 million people being recorded cases of infection. Our continent has lost over 100,000 lives, and we in Zimbabwe have lost over 1,400 people because of the pandemic. The last few months have been particularly terrible for our communities. I commend our healthcare workers and all those who are at the front line in this fight against the pandemic. All of us, and I mean all of us, have been affected by the pandemic due to the lockdowns and associated rules which have been imposed as part of the measures to curb the spread of the pandemic. We are not alone in this fight. Virtually every nation has had to respond to the scourge that has become an existential threat to humanity. However, it has reminded all of us that as members of the human family, we have shared vulnerabilities. And the importance of it is that in enhancing our networks of cooperation and assistance in the face of this common enemy, we are able to build stronger bonds. I commend the excellent work of everyone who has worked hard and invested much to the benefit of the whole world to find solutions and to protect humanity from this deadly pandemic. In our context, Zimbabwe has been unique. Zimbabwe is weighed down by a twin crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic and a bad governance authoritarian pandemic. Rising authoritarianism has rendered the state unstable, saddled with serious contradictions. Unstable, oppressive regimes are known to be very dangerous to their own citizens. The gross human rights violations against regional and international instruments must be seen with this and in this context. But we must not lose hope. Storms must make us stronger, yet they never last forever. My fellow Zimbabweans, I do not take it for granted that we are able to meet here today. Our families, communities, and the nation have been buffeted by multiple tragedies. I stand before you with grief and in grief. It is hard to sleep at night when I know that there are families that have lost their homes, their land, their livelihoods, their only means of survival, their opportunities, not because of natural disaster, but as a result of many mad actions, omissions and commissions, by cruel actions driven by greed, lack of empathy, and of course the numbness of compassion. My prayer every day is that we never lose our ability to have compassion for each other, to feel for each other. The blows of COVID-19, corruption, the collapse in our healthcare system, unemployment, and other demands that have continued to affect us, continue to demand that we answer to the call of action. It is in this context, fellow countrymen, that I present to you the Zimbabwe Agenda 2021. However, before I do that, I must comment on how we have fared in the past year. We have done very well, and I must conclude by celebrating and congratulating all of you, because we are survivors. We have survived. 2020 was a difficult year. 2020 was a difficult and very, very dangerous year because of the pandemic, but also because of other problems. It was a difficult year in the context of the fact of the forces that were deployed against us, the people, but also against us in particular within the progressive movement. In itself, it has been a very strong testimony of the strength of the idea that we represent and the undying spirit of our people. In 2020, we faced the crisis, as I have already indicated, from two sources. The first was a crisis that I have already referred to, namely the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. The second crisis was due to authoritarianism and what I would term authoritarian consolidation by the incumbent, whereby the regime and the oppressors have embarked on a relentless assault and onslaught upon democracy and upon the People's Party. This assault involved the use of the state machinery to subvert democracy and the will of the people. The oppressors have engineered the expulsion of our democratically elected representatives from parliament, from local authorities in the councils. In their place, they have chosen to unilaterally, illegally, and criminally handpick individuals, some of whom we defeated and were defeated in 2018 in the elections. And these were foisted and have been foisted upon the people. Our party headquarters was forcibly occupied, depriving us of that opportunity to continue to wage our struggle from our own home. The oppressors have also diverted our funding under the Political Parties Finance Act, giving it to its surrogates, their beloved little boys and girls, whom they hope will continue to help them on their stranglehold in power. The purpose of this was all to punish ourselves, the People's Party, for resisting the illegitimacy of the outcome of 2018 elections, which lacked credibility and acceptability. The oppressors have believed that by stripping us of our assets and entitlements under the law, they would dampen our spirits and break us down. This has not worked. It will never work. It will not work. It can't work. The Zimbabwean people are politically literate, they are politically advanced, and they are politically illuminated. And they know that this cannot be allowed to go past them. They can distinguish between right and wrong. They know that some of us are being used by the oppressor as a scheme to derail and weaken the people's struggle. While other governments were working hard to contain the pandemic, the oppressors in Zimbabwe saw it as an opportunity to restrict political rights. They have suspended by-elections indefinitely under the guise of fighting the pandemic. Therefore, while the oppressors were allowing the removal of people's representatives, they've also tried to close the channel for choosing their replacements. This has deprived the people of the opportunity to reclaim and correct the injustice by ending the criminal abuse of office, the blatant theft that we have seen. Despite all these attacks on our party, we refuse to be cast as victims. Rather, we are survivors and winners. For when someone works so hard to try and destroy you, and they fail, it is because you are strong and you are a winner. We are invincible. We are indomitable. We are unconquerable. We are grateful mainly to you, the citizens, for continuing to believe in us, even against all odds, even as the oppressors and the terrorists have ganged up against the people and their project. This year, we'll see us consolidating, showing resilience and resistance. So in 2021, we will consolidate our position as a movement that represents the dreams, hopes, and aspirations of all progressive Zimbabweans. Oppressors have tried everything to decimate us, but we have remained solid, and we are humbled by the fact that your trust and confidence in us remains unshaken, remains unmoved. We do not regard those who have left us as losses, but as an important shedding off of the elements that impede and slow down our democratic struggle. This struggle is not moved by those who have mercenary zeal, but by those who are driven by missionary zeal. Those who want to eat have no place in this train of democracy. This is not about the pioneer column mentality. This is not about the Last Supper or a departure lounge mentality. It is about serving the people, not about our stomachs. It is about what we are giving, not what we are taking. It is about what we are going to do, not what we are going to be. And that is what makes us different. We have identified that the strategy of the oppressors is to create a controlled opposition, a government-controlled opposition under the command politics that has become the hallmark of this establishment. They hope to effectively establish a one-party state in all but the name. And we hope to see how they are going to do it, but we will stop them. We are back to the late 1980s, when ZANU-PF tried to push the one-party state agenda. That will not happen. It will not happen under our watch. We will stop them. We will stop dictators. We will stop oppressors. Now we see that the oppressors want to create a facade and a charade with a controlled opposition that sings from the ZANU-PF hymn sheet, that obeys ZANU-PF dictates and commands. This is not the year of allowing that. We are consolidating citizen action, but also the year of resisting the creation of a controlled opposition, creation of a controlled and captured alternative. The march towards a one-party state politics in this country is not going to be allowed. It is the year for both consolidating our party and also a year for resisting any machinations by the oppressor to build a controlled opposition. The oppressor cannot reform. It is clear that the oppressors have failed to reform. Actually, they've proven to be the worst than their predecessor. The year 2021 will be marked with peaceful resistance and resilience. The language of the oppressed is to resist the oppression. We will peacefully resist and oppose evictions, demolitions, and any violations of people's freedom and citizens' rights. We will peacefully resist and oppose sustaining businesses and companies that oppress us, the people. We will peacefully resist and oppose institutions that oppress us, the people. We will peacefully resist and oppose those that seek to undermine our democracy, attack citizens and their freedoms. We will peacefully resist all those who oppose us in our constitutional conduct and behavior and exercising our rights in terms of the Constitution. And we will oppose all unconstitutional acts. We will peacefully resist and oppose weaponization of the law and the justice system in our country. We will peacefully resist and oppose illegitimate, the oppressors that rigged and that continue to rig elections in our country. The people's agenda is to maintain the fight for democracy and to overcome the obstacles that have been placed in our own way. We will use 2021 to reconnect with the grassroots, which remains the anchor of the people's struggle, to embark, of course, on a major recruitment drive, both at home and in the diaspora. Allow me to state this. 2021 is a special year. It is a turning point in being a year of citizen convergence for change. This is our year for change, our year for reforms, our year to converge and come together. This is no longer about where you belong. From the churches, the trade unions, our labor, students, women's groups, our traditional leaders, our war veterans, every citizen, the vendors, the informal traders, this is now time to converge and come together. Save ourselves, young people, the elderly. We need all to come together. Igorere sungano yevanu yeshanduko. Umnyaka wabutano wabantu awalwela inkukuko indebele. This is the year to converge. This is the year to fight for change. This is the year for the citizen to be respected. Our agenda for 2021 is to bring citizens together under a new consensus, a new convergence, a new alliance, a broad tent, to speak with one voice, act with one accord, and win Zimbabwe for change. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. You and I are the ones who have to come together and to be the ones we have been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. The theme for this year in our Agenda 2021 is informed by key words: change, citizens, convergence. We are talking about reforms. The three concepts are in turn informed first and foremost by our strategic thrust to locate ourselves and our programming and the program of action with the people. Secondly, the issue of convergence is the citizens' talk around the strategy to initiate the formation of a broad alliance of citizens and their groups in their various forms. Democratic forces need to confront the national question as a collective of forces in a manner that should result in change and reforms in Zimbabwe, in the lives of Zimbabweans, in particular around the issue of the governance of our country. We need to do this. Thirdly, the theme is also informed by the desire for us to assert our leadership role in the alternative in our country as the main alternative voice of both reason and transformation. And let me just emphasize this fundamental point. Our thrust as we go into this year is to make sure that on citizens, we are giving citizens the lifeblood of all the work that we do. I have had to learn in a very difficult journey that anything we do over the years is all about the people. Political power lies in the people. Political power comes from the people. So we are from the people. We are for the people, and we are deployed to lead and guide, lead the people. I will never leave the people behind. In our programming, in our decision making, and in our messaging, you the people, come first. It is all about you. It is your party, it is your struggle, it is your country. Together, we are able to come and build a great country, strengthen it as a force that is a force for change, not just in the region, but on the continent. And nobody is going to be left behind. And this is why we always ask you to join the movement and get involved. And this is why it is important for you to be the central actors in whatever we're going to do. The issue of convergence is also important. Unity and collective action and non-violence are our rallying cry, the catalyst for change in our nation. The MDC Alliance will lead the formation of a broad church of citizen groups, an omnibus of the progressive. All democratic forces need to come and confront the national question. When we demand accountability, we speak with one voice, act collectively, we are able to then become a formidable force for meaningful change in the lives of our people. This year, in our convergence, we will demand accountability. Accountability in governance, accountability in policy making, accountability in oversight roles in parliament, accountability in local communities, in our local authorities. I must emphasize the importance of change. Democratic and transformational change lies at the core of who we are. Reforms are important. A people's government is basically the substance of a real change. A real change means taking what is broken and creating something new. We are the alternative voice, an alternative government. And for this great nation, we are there to present an alternative program. The party will, through our active citizen engagement and participation in consultation, achieve the complementary goals of winning elections, attaining state power, and transforming our country to be one of the strongest, not just on the continent, but in the world. This we can do. This we shall do. And this we will do. There are 5 key areas of focus for 2021. And these are as follows. Number 1, the people's agenda. Number 2, the citizen national agenda. Number 3, the reforms agenda. Number 4, the government agenda. And of course, 5, the global agenda. So that gives you the 5 core issues that we are going to be pushing. People's agenda, the citizen agenda, which is the national agenda, our reforms agenda, and the government agenda, and the global agenda. These 5 core issues are very important because they define where we are going. They define the content and substance of our struggle. First is the people's agenda. And on the people's agenda, we are refocusing our fights as a means to mobilize and energize the base, reassert our leadership role as an alternative government, building a mass-based people's party through recruitment, mobilization, mobilizing resources, strengthening the party as an institution administratively, technically, to make sure that we are ready to fight an electoral fight in the near future. We need to execute the struggle to its logical conclusion. We need to make sure that we are able to build a strong movement that is energized at the base, that is able to build a very strong and formidable show to give Zimbabweans a fighting chance. This can only happen if we invest in the grassroots, we invest in communities, we invest in the people at a local level. We will lead in our communities, we will lead community daily struggles, we will lead because that is where the party must be domiciled. I must emphasize that on the people, we have the agenda for the young people. As you are aware, Zimbabwe is a young nation in terms of demographics. Nearly 70% of the population is under the age of 35, which is the maximum youth age under our constitution. However, young people remain on the fringes, the margins, and peripherals of the political and economic spaces. We're not going to pretend that we know everything about the challenges that young people are facing. We will not assume or work on assumptions that we all know the needs and expectations of the young people. Instead, as a leadership, we're going to make sure that we build values of consultative politics. We want to embark on a major consultative drive and engage young people across the breadth and length of this country. In Matabeleland, in Mashonaland, in Manicaland, in Masingo, in Midlands, in Harare, in Ulawayo, we want to make sure that both young men and women, rural and urban areas, are engaged and are at the forefront and at the core phase of the struggles that we are going to fight. Our agenda for young people is to construct policies that are informed by their needs, that are informed by their expectations, policies that come from them rather than imposed on them from the top. We do not want to do policies for youth without the youth, purporting to know what they want. It is time to acknowledge the role that the youth play, and they are not our future. Young people are not our future. They are our today. If we are to harness the full potential and our full potential as a nation, we need to invest in this generation of leadership in Zimbabwe. Young people are leading. They are leading everywhere. Within the economy, in the arts industry, they are leading everywhere. Young people are leading even in churches. They are leading even in agriculture, in our farming. They are leading even in government. Young people are leading even in political parties. And young people, remember this. You are the face and force of this nation. You are the voice that should count. Your voice counts. Your voice matters. Your role makes a difference. Your role is going to make our country a great country. Making Zimbabwe great is only a possibility on account of an active force of young people. We want to give space to you, the young people, to listen to you, to construct policies together that will respond to your needs. One of our founding fathers of our nation, Dr. Joshua Nyongolo Nkabu-Kongomo, once said that young people will save Zimbabwe. That's why Zimbabwe will not perish. And let us do what he predicted. I'm sure that we will not disappoint him. He was a man of great wisdom. You would be proud to observe how young people in this day are taking the lead to save the country, to entertain the country, to lead the country, especially leading the country from the depths of authoritarian rule. Part of the key agenda under the people's agenda is to consolidate the people's part and to build this part on the recognition of the core strengths and appreciation of the points that require improvement. I've already stated that the oppressors sought to suffocate us by depriving us of our hard-won income, our hard-won votes, our hard-won mandate. But the MDC Alliance, which was entitled to the public funds under the Political Parties Finance Act, was deprived of that allocation. However, those funds have now been criminally, unlawfully, and unprocedurally diverted to another party, a party that lost elections, the MDCT. This is a scandal of the century. This party had no place on the ballot paper in 2018 and did not earn the right to any entitlement from the citizens. We must therefore rely on our members, because we know that there's been a criminal abuse of office by the incumbent to allocate resources to those who do not deserve, against the wishes of the citizens. For that reason, we are going to rely on you, the people of Zimbabwe, our members, our supporters, our leaders in the various stations of life, and you, the workers of Zimbabwe, colleagues who are able to mobilize resources to fund their struggle. We are therefore going to embark on a major fundraising activity and drive this year to make sure that we have a home at every constituency, and in every village, in every area and settlement. We are confident that the citizens, you the citizens, who respond to this call, the resource mobilization agenda will be implemented together with a massive recruitment agenda, with a massive mobilization agenda, with a massive organizing agenda to make sure that we are also making our young people active, we are making our adult population active and involved in this political struggle. Second, the reform agenda, or reform agenda, the item number 2. We need electoral and political reforms. We need a return to legitimacy and democracy in Zimbabwe. This is the reload document, our pathway to democracy, our pathway to legitimacy. Pushing for reforms and the reforms roadmap and pursuing the reforms agenda through our various zones of struggle is a core and critical struggle. We are going to be active on the street. Those who occupy the street will ultimately occupy the state. Citizen mass action is going to be our immediate point of reference. Elections are going to be our core area as a zone of struggle. Parliament is another zone of struggle. Local government is a zone of struggle. We want to make sure we guard these zones of autonomy. Diplomacy, foreign relations is a zone of autonomy. And we must guard these areas. Courts, the media, the state, we must occupy these zones because these are zones of struggle. We have identified them and we need to control, lead, and dominate them. The agenda for political reforms has been on the table for many years. When the MDC was founded 2 decades ago, the agenda to reform and reform in governance was such a big one because governance was already in terminal decline. The transformation of governance, the society, remains at the core of the national agenda. However, history has shown that there are impediments to the path to power, to the path to transfer of power. It's one thing to win elections. It's another one to transfer power. It's one thing to appeal to the electorate. It's another one to convince the electorate to give effect and to be just to what the electorate would have determined. So we need, as a matter of fact, to deal with this electorate dichotomy. By the electorate, I mean the securocrats, the technocrats, the bureaucrats. They need to understand that ultimately it is the electorate that should define and determine who should govern and who should occupy the office of civilian authority. It is important to have free and fair, credible elections because they provide the basis for legitimacy. Without legitimacy, there is no accountability. Without legitimacy, there is no performance. Without legitimacy, there is no credibility. So it's important for legitimacy to be a big factor because that is what gives birth to a stable state. This is what gives birth to a stable state and a stable people. We have seen that no matter how many elections are held, if there's no legitimacy, if there's a deficit of legitimacy and a deficiency of the endorsement of the people, the country will remain stuck in the doldrums of failure, in the doldrums of incompetence. And we have seen this. We need Zimbabwe to return to legitimacy, openness, and democracy, our reload matrix, our reload pathway. This is the sole reason why we continue to advocate for political reforms, chief of which the reforms entail the electoral system being changed. Indeed, this is the principal reason why we have called for dialogue, not to try and secure a seat around the table in government, nor to a government of national unity, but yes, to a nation of national unity, so that we are able to face together. We have dialogue not to share power, but to share a vision. We have dialogue not to share seats or spoils of electoral outcomes, but to make sure that we are able to share a trajectory at various levels as a people. It is not about finding accommodation in this system. We have never been people who are about personal entitlement or aggrandizement, but to play a part in designing an electoral path that would prevent the risks of illegitimacy that have always affected our past elections. Political reforms are not merely changing the rules of the game on paper. They must be realized in practice. In this regard, human rights abuses, selective application of law must stop. There has to be and observance of the rights of the people, their fundamental freedoms. There has been a spate of petty arrests, detentions of political activists, human rights defenders, journalists in recent years, all of them being based on frivolous and spurious grounds. Look at what has happened to our legend, Hope Chingono. Look at what has happened to our own senior leaders in the party. There are far too many to mention. Look at what has happened to even our luminaries and citizens in society. This does not only damage the national country's standing in the community of nations, but it also, in a way, increases the insecurity and vulnerability of our citizens. We must say, in order for this reform agenda to be concluded, we focus on asserting the Zimbabwe's big 5 most urgent fights. As you know that in 2020, we had 5 big fights that we articulated. But for this 2021, those fights subsist, and we continue with them. The first one is the fight for a people's constitution and constitutionalism. This will be a fight to defend the preservation of the constitution that the people put in place, demanding that it is implemented with all its laws aligned, in particular issues of devolution, issues of making sure that we have independent institutions being entrenched. And of course, in that regard, let me underscore that we strongly oppose Amendment number 2, which seeks to entrench and introduce imperial presidents and reverse the gains of a constitutional democracy that we attained through a referendum. We will demand and oppose this executive culture of wanting to impose a tyrannical system where we have a big man instead of a big institution, where we have one man instead of having a one nation. This is going to be our big fight. Item number 2 is the fight for livelihoods, the dignity and a better life. We will champion alternative policies and demand that we address the needs and challenges of Zimbabweans, in particular the working people in their various sectors, our civil service, our doctors, our health workers, our teachers, our private sector workforce, informal traders, and vulnerable groups in both urban and rural areas. The success of this fight will be anchored on alternative economic policies, and we will engage citizens to articulate our alternative economic policies. We have our smart blueprint, our dictionary to solving economic problems in Zimbabwe, and we have the answers. We know that they have the problems, they have the questions, but we have the answers. And for that, we will engage citizens to demand sound economic administration in the administration and in the superintendentship of the affairs of our nation. Distortions and contradictions in the economy must be eliminated. Zimbabwe must dollarize, not to have these contradictions where you have RTGS, EcoCash, but without a standard. We need to dollarize wholly, formally, and to be able to have a single price so that there are no distortions, there's no arbitrage, there's no rent seeking, there's no kind of economic manipulation that we are seeing affecting ordinary people. We will demand a decent wage and salaries for all our workers. Our civil servants, men and women in uniform, must be well remunerated. They must be well fed. They must be well looked after. They need to be happy. A happy men and women in uniform is a happy nation. They carry the badges of honor. When they are putting on those national uniforms, they are doing it on our behalf. We must encourage them. We must support them. We must take care of them. We must look after them. And of course, we also expect in return professionalism, because that is all we are asking as citizens. We also are going to emphasize a very robust economic agenda to make sure that our economy is pulled out of the doldrums. This is as a result of sheer incompetence, mismanagement, poor governance, corruption, which have all led to misallocation, misappropriation, and even the issue of stealing of scarce resources. Get a case in point of ministers who have literally raided the coffers of our nation. Ministers who have literally been caught in the cookie jar with their hands in the cake of our nation, in the pie of our nation. The national cake is increasingly being privatized into the hands of cartels, and that the cartels are associated with a particular political party, particularly ZANU-PF, is a fact. Policy inconsistencies, human rights abuses, insecurity of the private property, especially the rights, all combine to discourage investors to seriously consider Zimbabwe as a viable destination for investment. More significantly, terrorism, breakdown of rule of law, the issue of violating citizen rights, inconsistencies in the cockpit of leadership, police clashes, and police contradictions have all militated against our country being a safe zone for investment. More significantly, we continue to hold the view that illegitimacy is a significant barrier to Zimbabwe's economic progress and its prosperity. As long as the oppressors suffer from the legitimate deficit and a deficiency of credibility, the country will continue to struggle to attract serious investors. In fact, what we have seen is that the country, instead of attracting investors, it is attracting dealers who are coming here to give us a raw deal. We need genuine investors who are here for a win-win situation for themselves and for our nation. To make economic progress, we must all resolve our political questions, tick all the boxes that have affected our country's perception in the family of nations. We must have political reforms that will facilitate legitimate electoral outcomes. We need to make sure that at a substantive level, the ballooning national debt remains a significant albatross on the economic recovery and must be dealt with. We have been in arrears regarding the external debt for nearly 2 decades, making it extremely difficult to access support when we want to get that support. It is in the short term and very expensive in terms of what we want to see. This is unsustainable. Our economic plan involves comprehensive measures to negotiate our way out of these areas. However, we have repeatedly said this. Our national case is made stronger when we resolve our political questions and challenges. When we resolve that, we will be able and will be in a better position to plead for better terms and even deal with issues of debt and be able to start afresh, even in debt forgiveness, as it is under this oppressive system and oppressive regime that has shown kleptocratic tendencies. Our creditors think that any deal is akin to throwing a man down a bottomless pit. We must reform politically, and that is what we intend to push for. Still on the economy, we also want to push ahead with better policies for resource extraction, processing, in the idea that local resources should benefit local communities. Not only that, we need beneficiation. We need to make sure that in Kwekwe, where gold is being mined, let's have a gold industry so that international players, investors would come and trade in gold in Kwekwe. That is a sign of smart economics, a sign of progressive economics. We've also seen that there is a sign of incompetence and unbridled greed among the elite, particularly in the communities where we have seen communities being bastardized. Chiadzwa is a case in point. Chingwizi is a case in point. We also have Chilonga as a case in point, and many others where people have been displaced. In Wange, where power lines are just going past the people without benefiting the people in the local communities. People in Binga who see a lot of opportunities and resources, but without benefiting from them. This must stop. The issue of diamonds that have enriched political elites and their foreign allies must also be looked into. Our agenda is to ensure that natural resources do not become a case, but become a blessing. God bless us with all these resources, and we do not want to take this as a case, but to make sure that it's a blessing that will benefit all the citizens. Dividends going into health, going into our roads, going into our schools, and going into our infrastructure. We will continue to resist the mortgaging of our country and its resources in return for odious debt and in return for benefit by a few. 3, the fight against corruption. Corruption is killing us. Corruption is killing you. Corruption is killing us. Oh, we have seen the disadvantages of corruption. No nation succeeds when its leadership is corrupt. As you know, a fish rots from the head. Corruption starts at the top. And we have seen that there is no interest for corruption to be dealt with at the top. If anything, the fight against corruption is being turned into a political scheme to fight and settle scores with opponents. It is being turned into an affair where the big fish are frying the small fish. It is being turned into an affair where the top guys are going after the bottom guys. That cannot be allowed. The people have a right to a corruption-free and an uncaptured state, uncaptured institutions. We do not want a captured judiciary. We do not want a captured parliament. We do not want a captured cabinet. We do not want captured ministers. We do not want captured independent commissions so that they are dependent, independent commissions. We need to make sure that we deal with all these problems. Cartels must fall. We don't want cartels that are destroying and ruining our nation. The eviction of villagers for commercial cronyism must also end. The victimization of villagers, the victimization of Zimbabweans and citizens is something that must be resolved. Elite state capture must and shall be dismantled. The level of corruption in the country has reached alarming levels and is sounding very, very high. The decibels of insanity and corruption have gone to levels that are unimaginable. The cancer has now permeated the whole board politics. It is almost like people are singing a national hymn in corruption. This must be dealt with. The rotten pinnacle, which is at the state, going right to the lowest ranked employee in government, is something that must be dealt with. It has even permeated the private sector and even the church. All sectors of our society, we must deal with this cancerous corruption. The cancer of corruption is also now assumed another dimension, the dominance of toxic cartels. All key business engagements by the government are now monopolized by a cartel of a few individuals. This menace has milked the country and resulted in downstream suffering of ordinary people. The capture of the state also involves the capture of other pillars of the state and agencies that include some important elements within government. That cannot be allowed. There can never be an inclusive and shared growth in an environment where the state is belonging to a few. This fight will therefore be focused on exposing corruption in the country and demanding accountability from all. Demand accountability at a national level. Demand accountability even at workplaces. We need people to account. Number 4, a fight for a people's government and reforms. This is an important one. We need a new way of governing Zimbabwe. We need ethical leaders. Zimbabwe needs new leaders. We need leaders, not rulers. Leadership is about values, ethics, and integrity. Zimbabwe won't be able to have its pulse again. We will never be able to resuscitate our pulse rate without ethical leadership. We have seen rottenness in government. We have seen rottenness in how we transact our business in government. We have lowered the standards of accountability and integrity. You will find that we have institutionalized lying, government specializing in giving citizens falsehoods, even propaganda. That cannot be accepted. We need to restore dignity, integrity, and restore the broken social contract. Consent must replace coercion. The authority to govern must and is derived from the people. The people of Zimbabwe and the international community do not believe that the government formed after 2018 elections represents the will of the people as expressed during the 2018 election. That's why government has not been able to pull all the people. Even if you go by the disputed ZEC results, the nation is divided. Mr. Mnangagwa is leading half the population, not the entire population. The entire population has to be involved, included. And to include them, there has to be an understanding of that sentiment and mandate. That is what we represent. It is evident that this political legitimacy deficit, notwithstanding the legal legitimacy bestowed by the court, has hindered the ability of the regime to govern effectively because there is no trust between the governed and those who are governing. This has caused a massive performance legitimacy crisis and an insurmountable trust deficit. The trust deficit has in turn created a confidence crisis that has also shown itself in the economy, that is now shunned by both domestic and international investors. This fight will therefore be focused on bringing to the fore the political legitimacy crisis, which has led to the performance gaps and the legitimacy gaps manifesting in a non-performing and non-delivering economy, with the objective of a soft landing of the crisis through political dialogue, and if need be, to make sure that there has to be pressure for that dialogue to be realized in returning our country to legitimacy. I've heard a lot of people say, why are you not dialoguing without clear parameters? We do not want to dialogue just to enter into a chorus. We don't want a choir of yes men or yes women. We need to make sure that the nation is built on the foundation of all the key tenets, all the key questions, all the past challenges, past omissions, and commissions to be resolved and to be sorted. At the heart of the resolution of the national question is the urgent need for the country to embark on and implement a raft of political reforms, a menu of political reforms. The country to date has actually failed in its re-engagement efforts with the international community because it has been paying lip service and paper commitment to urgent need for political reforms. The fight for political reforms is an important one. It is clearly articulated in our policy document for the alternative legislative reform agenda on elections, the PRICE document, Principles for a Credible Election. It is there. We have given it to those who care to listen, to those who are also in government, to our colleagues in ZANU-PF, to the civic society, to the international community. This is our humble submission on what we are supposed to have as the nature, character, and extent of reforms. This is important. It's an area of reform and it's very important. Last but not least on the reform agenda is number 5, the issue of the people's rights and freedoms, the security of person, the rule of law. Zimbabweans need security. Zimbabweans need not to be afraid of their government. The government must not be kuzeza baba, really binya, terrorizing people. Government must be a friend of everyone. Our police officers must be sanctuaries of refuge. Our soldiers must, you must, when you see them, see a doyen of our security, of our comfort, of our protection and our preservation. There has been a marked deterioration in the respect for people's freedoms and rights. Why would you have police officers moving around with baton sticks? That is antiquated. That's Stone Age. Baton sticks are for animals, not for human beings. Why should you smash windscreens for combis? If you have problems, if they have committed offenses, just arrest them and let the law take its course. Why are you taking the law into your own hands? The hands of police officers are not the law. The hands of police officers are not courts of law. So we cannot have those hands being reduced into instruments of terror against citizens. Democracy has been bludgeoned, and the oppressor has attended to corrupt, violent, and dictatorship of proportions that have never been seen. That must stop. That will not be allowed in a new Zimbabwe. That will stop. Our police must know that they are for the people, for the law, and for the country, and most importantly, for God. They must respect the rights of citizens. Our fight for freedoms will focus on the deteriorating human rights situation in the country, which has seen the state using lawfare to persecute dissenting voices, and also especially our leadership of the party. On that reform agenda, there's the issue of the diaspora. It is common knowledge that our country has experienced an exodus of large numbers of people, possibly over 5 million over the last 2 decades, and that forms the largest part of the diaspora section in population. We want to thank you, those who are in the diaspora. You have done us wonders. You have kept us going. You have sustained families. You have kept us going, and we want to thank you for that. You have remained attached to our country. You have dedicated members and our families. They are dedicated members of our nation. Indeed, last year, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe reported that diaspora remittances were up 45% between January and September 2020. Diaspora remittances are a major source of foreign currency in our country and a major source of livelihood and survival. Kudos to our fellow citizens in the diaspora. Thank you once more. We therefore have to, although we lament the loss of skills, thank them for benefiting our country, particularly as we benefit from the remittances from their contributions. It is very important to know that certain countries have been sustained by remittance from the diaspora. Eritrea is a case in point, and many others. We also have to harness this important element, but not just get resources without also giving them rights. It is very important that the Constitution acknowledges dual citizenship, something that we have fought hard to also have, despite resistance from our estuary friends. However, the country does not give enough in terms of respect to our fellow citizens. The electoral system, for example, remains so exclusionary, meaning that those fellow citizens still cannot enjoy one of the fundamental rights of citizenship, the right to vote. We will push for the agenda for the diaspora to vote and for more inclusive policy so that those in the diaspora are not only in political participation but also in economic participation beyond remittances, so that we don't just receive from them, but we also give to them the rights that they deserve. If we can have policies that are friendly to our foreign investors, surely there is no reason why we cannot have targeted policies that promote our own domestic investors who are in the diaspora, the members of the diaspora. The third agenda, which is important, the citizen agenda, the national agenda. We intend to build a broad tent, building a broad alliance of citizens for change domestically and internationally in pursuit of resolution and the resolution of the national crisis. Nation building is important. It's important for us to be nation builders, to be transformers, to make sure that we build a vision, a collective vision, not one vision, like what we have had, Vision 2030. It's not a vision, it's Division 2030, because it only but captures the imagination of one side of our population. We need an inclusive process of nation building, of visioning our country, a collective process, so that we have a one-team approach, a one Zimbabwe approach, a vision Zimbabwe approach, a new consensus, a new convergence of all citizens, an intergenerational consensus. Right now, there is a lot of suspicion between generations. The young generation is treating the older generation as the perpetrators and as those who have deprived us of opportunities. The older generation is treating the younger generation as snakeholders, as people who are never to be trusted. So it's important for that intergenerational consensus to be built, so that we build a one team, so that we become a nation, not just a country, so that we become a people, not just individuals, so that we become one common agenda and one common direction going forward for the common good. Our fourth agenda item is the government agenda. We need to show our readiness and preparedness to govern. We have shown that. We did it in the inclusive government. We did so well. You know that the ministries that we managed were top-notch. We can do it. We will do it again. But in our own approach, we are going to resuscitate an effective alternative cabinet model. We will have a new Zimbabwe policy dialogue series and forums to make sure that we are articulating our alternative policies. We have those policies, policies that can rescue Zimbabwe, policies that can take us to another level. We are also going to insist on an annual policy conference to be able to get people together, to move people together. Also on this one, we will encourage the coming together as a way of creating a platform for the convergence that I spoke to on the issue of nation building and national agenda, to have a convention of all Zimbabweans, churches, labor, students, women's groups, young people, political parties, government, to come together in a convention, articulate the reforms, articulate the kind of country we want to see, the nation we want to build. This is part of a government agenda. We will also have a legislative agenda in parliament, local government agenda that speaks to those zones of autonomy. As an alternative government, we are always in a state of permanent readiness, ready to take over and govern in a manner that gives opportunity to all. And that makes a country, our country, greater than any country on the globe. The People's Party will continue to develop and update its readiness to govern. We will also unveil our new Zimbabwe blueprint, which is basically an articulation of what we promise and what is entailed, what we commit to in a new Zimbabwe. We'll be rolling out the new Zimbabwe policy dialogue programs, as I've already indicated. We'll strengthen our alternative cabinet model, and we'll also have our smart policies reviewed and revised, updated. And this is an ongoing agenda, which we must show and demonstrate through performance in formal theaters of power, such as parliament and local authorities, that indeed we are ready to govern. A combination of the two pandemics, authoritarianism and COVID-19, has impacted on our activities on both platforms over the past year. The pandemic has led to the closure of these formal theaters, reducing their effectiveness. However, in the case of local authorities, and I must emphasize, the problem is actually a system of government. The capture of local authorities by central government is a big problem. Everything is actually being done by central government, but when it comes to responsibility and accountability, it is archived and sent to local government. That is a problem. Local government cannot be local government if it does not have power, authority, and devolved power to be able to do what they're supposed to do. So the legislation needs to be changed to give authority and power and accountability. The minister of local government must not be the mayor of mayors. He must not be the mayor of all local authorities. He must be out of local authorities as a matter of urgency. We need a structural problem to be dealt with. This is a structural problem that affects the efficacy and efficiency of our local authorities. The oppressors have no incentive to make changes that would free local government from the clutches of central government. This explains why the fight for change at the central government level remains the foremost objective in the people's struggle for change. As part of our work regarding government, we are going to raise the level of resistance to any proposed unilateral changes to the Constitution that are retrogressive. We have to ensure that the Constitution is upheld, respected. We can't have constitutions without constitutionalism. We can't have a Constitution that is not respected in terms of its terms and values. We can't have a Constitution that is not implemented and that is not honored. The attempt to change our very young Constitution is retrogressive because it reverses the gains that the people made when it was adopted. Oppressors would want provisions that have not been implemented not to be put in place. We are going to lead and resist an amendment to the Constitution that is unilateral, reactionary, counter-revolutionary, and retrogressive. In fact, we want alignment, not amendment. The last and important agenda is the global agenda. 2021 must be and will be a different one because of the steps we are going to take to make sure that we define the future of this country. It cannot and it will not be business as usual. At all times, you know that we've been guided by our vision to dismantle autocracy, achieve democratic change in transforming Zimbabwe to a sustainable, just, prosperous, God-loving, God-fearing, ethical and democratic state. We believe in both internationalism and Pan-Africanism. We are part of the family of nations. We believe that despite our differences, we have a shared common interest. Indeed, our national interest is best served by working together and cooperating with other progressive nations. A nation is not an island. We are because they are. So we believe that we are going to be pushing a very radical and robust program of a new Africa, the vision New Africa. And as Africans, we acknowledge our shared history, not just of subjugation, but also of resistance and triumph against all odds to govern ourselves. Our liberation struggles are a case in point. Nevertheless, despite all these liberation struggles, heroic struggles against the colonial order, Africans continue to suffer from the twin challenges of a deficit of good governance and also the big men syndrome, men who refuse to vacate power because they are corrupted absolutely by power. The New Africa focus will emphasize the vision for a new Africa We'll also be building strong networks with emerging young leaders, with emerging progressive leaders on the continent, centered on shared democratic values such as respect for human rights, freedom, fair, free elections, guarding against electoral authoritarianism, elections without democracy. We have upcoming elections in Zambia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and other such countries. We as Africa, and indeed the world, must not endorse fraudulent elections. We must have the high standard of elections on the African continent. Another area of focus for us is to build this new Africa consensus that is based on transparent governance, especially in the extractive sector, in the context of illicit financial flows. The new Africa focus must breathe life into the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Agenda 2063, but also making sure that we are able to have a borderless Africa, a one-visa Africa, so that there is no need for us to have a visa. We must also begin to build infrastructure. Why should our calls to Malawi go to France first? We need internet exchange points, termination points here on the African continent. We need to build international standard roads on the continent. The Cape to Cairo vision that speaks to solid infrastructure, solid media on the African continent, so that we are able to tell our story as a great continent, so that we are not a dark continent, but a great continent. We support the struggle for African nations to be recognized as equal partners in all spheres. And of course, we call on our brothers, sisters across the globe and the continent to support democratic growth and economic prosperity for all. We detest rigging of elections and dictatorship. We reject efforts to entrench authoritarian regimes on the continent. And to this end, we will then forge solidarities with states and progressive movements that are advancing democratic ideals and transformational leadership. For Zimbabwe to boost its prospects of recovery, it needs to be fully integrated into the family of nations, not as a terrorist nation, but as a tourist nation. This is not achieved by performing a window dressing exercise or undertaking forced reforms. Rather, it needs real, deep-rooted, substantive root and branch reforms that demonstrate a commitment to good governance, transparency, protection of human rights, rule of law, and adherence to norms that are generally accepted in progressive societies. Our Global Advocates campaign is going to be rolled out. We will mobilize the international community in the support for the struggle in Zimbabwe. We are going to make sure that we build the international community as a scaffolding mechanism, an assurance to the Reload program, a return to legitimacy and democracy in Africa. We believe in Afrocentric focus, targeting all the key blocks on the African continent and the African Union. Africans can do it. Africans can govern. Africans can lead. Africans can solve their problems. We need that kind of an approach. International solidarity is also going to be important. We must not expect to just receive solidarity, but also give solidarity to other progressive struggles globally, especially in Myanmar, Hong Kong, and elsewhere. In Syria, we should also be working closely with our various international progressive partners and other such platforms that are important to strengthen multilateralism, deal with the challenge of climate change, deal with other pertinent questions that are supposed to be resolved. The hour calls for us to step outside our comfort zones, to use whatever we have, to focus on rebuilding our nation, driven by love instead of self-interest. Community needs over private gain. We have the opportunity to join hands together and be able to do the work that we are supposed to do, that needs to be done, to stop this cycle of destruction. I believe that we have what it takes to join hands, to work together and build. I believe that we have what it takes to save lives. And I see that we are losing mothers and babies because of the health system that has failed us. It reminds me of the opportunity that I have had that is being denied to others who cannot even raise a family. I believe that we are at the apex of our destinies to step into our callings and to be the voices that embody justice. We cannot demand in others what we cannot practice ourselves. If Zimbabwe is to rise from the ashes, we must reflect, reform, and transform. It is time for us to clean our own government, clean up our government in terms of practice, in terms of orientation and content. Our crisis in leadership must end. We demand accountability. I'm appealing to all of you Zimbabweans and friends of Zimbabwe to all join hands with us as we work to eradicate poverty, as we work to reform our institutions, as we work to save our democracy. Zimbabwe will rise from the ashes. Zimbabwe will rise again. Zimbabwe will be made great again and even greater. Zimbabwe will rise as we work together. I challenge you to look beyond our differences. I say to you, we must embrace each other, embrace one another, not embarrass one another, and have this opportunity to embrace to build a great nation. We can do this without undermining one another. We cannot do what we have to do without each and every one of you. Finally, I call upon every Zimbabwean to come and join hands as we all rise above the challenges of our time, rise above our pet differences, rise above our stations of life, and be able, as Zimbabweans, to all come. Come, let us join hands. Come, let us reason together. Come, let us have our dignity together to save our lives. Let us work and walk together. Let us all fight together to end this suffering, to build a better country, a different Zimbabwe. Let us all come and make one thing. We are better together. We are better united. We are better when we have all our efforts united for the common good. We are better when we are all united by the bond of love, rather than the petty and artificial differences that divide us. Join us to make the history. Join us to make Zimbabwe great. Join us to come and converge and be the citizens. You are the citizens. Do it, make it. Let's converge. Let's reason together. It is very important to all come together and move together. Let this year be your year, the year for citizens to converge, the year to correct the mistakes of the past, the year to make sure that Zimbabwe is brought back on track. Zimbabwe is made great as a nation. Let's do it for our future generations. Let's do it for our nation. Let's do it for our nations. Igore resungano yevanhu yeshanduko umunyaka omutano wabantu abatwela inguquko. From Zimbabwe, we are able to launch a progressive struggle from Zambezi to Limpopo, building a great Zimbabwe, making a Zimbabwe that is greater, the great Zimbabwe. One people, one vision, one nation, always for a greater Zimbabwe, always for a better Zimbabwe, always for you. Winning Zimbabwe for change, change that delivers. God bless you. God bless Zimbabwe. God bless Africa. God is in it. Be blessed this 2021. May you succeed. May we fight for our land. May we build Zimbabwe. May we unite to make Zimbabwe greater again. God is with us, and God will take us there. We are able. You are able. Let's do it. I thank you. you.